All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Zachary Taylor, who has a PE and is a enterprise architect at Inventive Technologies with over 35 years of experience designing high availability and mission critical systems at premier companies such as Nokia, GE, Lockheed Martin, and Motorola. He has a master's degree in electrical engineering and is the author of the book Designing High Availability Systems Designed for Six Sigma and Classical Reliability Techniques. So, Mr. Taylor, go ahead and pass it on to you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. So I'm going to be a little bit different than probably what you are used to. I know that all of you are up-and-coming cybersecurity specialists, and we definitely need a lot more cybersecurity engineers and experts in the field. So I would talk just a little bit about myself as we look at how I see cybersecurity from the roles I've had over my long, maybe not so illustrious career. But I'm really excited to be able to share some information with you that might intrigue you, and I will state at the front that I am not a cybersecurity expert, but I know people who are cybersecurity experts. I work with cybersecurity experts, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. And then at the end, we'll try to save some time for your questions and comments. So with that, let's start with my background. So I started way back in the day, back in the 80s. I worked on the CG-47 guided missile cruiser. You can see a picture of this here. Started off my career in the Defense Department, working for a private shipbuilding company that worked on this guided missile cruiser. I then worked on the F-14 Warthog, which you see the picture of this little beast here. This has got these two giant engines on the top, and it's got this Gatling gun at the bottom that shoots out high speed, high velocity bullets. They're tank killers. So this guy flows. It's called the A-10 Warthog, and it flies very close to the ground and used for intercepting tanks and other military devices. It was used in the Iraq War and other endeavors. I was involved in that system in designing the flight control systems. So obviously I had my electrical engineering degree, and we worked on the flight control computers. So worked on the avionics control algorithms that drove the algorithms, or drove the control surfaces for the airplane. So basically, if you flew this without any of that control augmentation, the vibration from the wings would cause extreme stress and could cause the plane to vibrate to such an extent it could crack up. So it was designed to smooth out those perturbations as the tank killer flew along. And this is where I first got my start in reliability engineering and high availability design. One of the problems they had with this plane was that, unfortunately, because of the way it flew close to the terrain, it crashed many times. So there were several dozen pilots who lost their lives because they ran into a hill or a mountain and they weren't able to pull the plane up fast enough. So we developed a system that would create a control algorithm based upon statistics and probability that would help the pilot identify when they were getting too close or there was a imminent collision detection. It's almost very similar to what we have today with the new cars that have the capability of alerting you and putting on the brakes automatically if you're driving too fast and you're getting too close to an obstacle. So this was a similar situation. And we actually had the system, sort of like we have with Alexa and some of these other high-tech devices. So the military in the defense industry usually have some of these quote unquote very cool technologies that are developed there first before it finds its way into the commercial marketplace. So the computer system was complete with a voice activated system, and if the pilot got too close to the ground, a voice would come in and say pull up, pull up, pull up, which is an indication of the pilot he needs to pull on the stick to get out of a imminent collision situation. And it is also interesting. We talked a lot about how do you create a system that would be helpful to the pilot, but without having a lot of false negatives. In other words, if you're flying fine and then all of a sudden the system falsely tells you that you're having an imminent collision, then the pilot's going to ignore it. On the other hand, if you're too late with a warning, then the system would crash. So a lot of interesting work done on there. And then I also worked on the Icelandic air defense system. You see this little radar system in this picture over to the right. So this was during the height of the Cold War when NATO and the U.S. military were concerned about overflights of Iceland. It's a strategic location, and in case of hostilities, the Russian planes could fly over Iceland and the U.S. planes also. So this system was designed to intercept those communications and provide real-time information to other assets so they could deal with those systems. And my personal involvement on that was the development of the operations and management system as well as the fault management system to identify any kind of problem, report that information back up, try to do an automatic diagnostic on it. And in this situation, I was working on writing the software that created the fault management system for this system. And then later, I moved on to Motorola and Nokia. And in Motorola, you see the little cell phone tower at the bottom of the screen. That I worked on the LTE base station architecture, where we were also continuing to develop my career in terms of fault management, reliability, and diagnostic capability to find out where the problems are in the software and hardware, determine how to isolate those problems and how to mitigate those problems. Well, this is where the high availability piece started to come in, where you try to identify what is the action you can take to minimize the problems associated with the system. And obviously, multiple redundancy was coming into play at this point. So you have redundant computers, and the same technology applies to the other systems I worked on, like on the F-14 fighter jet fly-by-wire system, where you have multiple mission control computers, and you vote. You have a master node that basically votes on the different flight control systems to determine which one is valid. And if they all have the same answer, all is good. So in those cases, you need an odd number of systems so that you don't want to have a tie vote. If you only have two computer systems, and how do you tell which one is working and which one is not? So multiple computer systems to do that. And the same applied to the base stations. And the base station is basically an LTE device that has the antennas at the bottom, has the antennas attached to a mast, and at the bottom is a enclosed computer system that processes the signals for your cell phone. When you make a call, it goes to the base station, and from there it gets processed through the rest of the network. The customers we worked with at both Motorola and Nokia included, Verizon, AT&T, KDDI in Japan, communication carriers across the world, and they were always very stringent about wanting to have the most robust, highest available system. So did that for a while, and then I moved on over to Aventive, where I am now. And if you see this little tablet in the middle with the blue screen, we'll talk a little bit more about what that device is and what we use it for. And of course, with all my multiple experiences with both in the commercial field and the defense field. I put some of that thoughts together and wrote a book a few years ago on how best to design high availability systems. So at Inventive Technologies, I'm sure probably not many of you even heard of what Inventive Technologies is, but believe it or not, there is a vibrant technology infusion in the prison industry. I'm sure all of you seen those movies. They still make them, it looks like, where you have some inmate holding on to some old-fashioned telephone with a big old black handset and a big cord and talking on the phone to make his phones from inside the prison facility. Inventive kind of put all that on top of its head. So these days, more and more of the facilities across the jail facilities and Department of Corrections across the country are looking for communication technology that will help not only the prison industry themselves, but also will help the inmates. So the inmates now have the capability of using tablets. They have the capability of using cell phones, video communication device, video visitation. Um, they have the ability to access funds and pay for things at the commissary. There's all kinds of technologies that really don't have time to get into, but there's three pieces of it. We have Securus Technologies that provides corrections technology solutions, which I'm a part of, and then the JPay system provides money transfer, and then we have AllPaid that is more of the credit card and money processing end of Inventive. So here we see the JP6S tablet. This has just been launched a couple of months ago. And if you can see from this device, it's kind of hard, maybe you can't see it, but around the edges you see it's a clear plastic. It's a clear plastic device. It's a 7-inch Android device, and it has been it's custom designed and built by Securus to ensure safety, ensure security. So this is where we really want to focus on security. If you can imagine, some of the inmates, some of the incarcerated individuals get very creative. They find ways to break into the devices. They find ways to break the internet so that they can go off to forbidden sites, communicate amongst each other. So it's a very, in that sense, it can be a very hostile environment. We're not providing tablets to a typical consumer that may want to take care of their devices and is not interested in destroying or hacking their devices as much as you might imagine from inmates, some of the inmates. And so it's a very interesting challenge. I can't go into a lot of the details because that's kind of confidential of the different techniques that are used. But as we continue to learn more about these techniques, we find ways to counteract them. There's two basic categories. There's mechanical attacks where an inmate would try to force their way through, break it open with a screwdriver or something to get inside the tablet to create a radio. And they're very creative. They can create radio signals. They can communicate with other inmates or outside of the facility. And then there's more of electronic means where they find ways to hack into a Wi-Fi signal, because these are all Wi-Fi devices, and trying to look at vulnerabilities and hack into the system. And if you can imagine, they have all day on their hands. They have plenty of time to think of ways to create mischief. So it's been quite challenging and fun to do that. So with that, I want to show you just a quick video on the introduction of the tablet we just launched a couple of months ago. Okay, kind of hip, kind of cool. Uh, I I was involved in working on the reliability and the availability, as well as the robustness. How do we improve the device to make it as robust and as secure as possible? So, with that, I don't want to spend the whole time talking about that, but now let's kind of focus on enterprise architecture and cybersecurity. What are those relationships? So, my current role is more in as an enterprise architect and an infrastructure manager. What that means is I'm responsible for a couple of things. One is the new product development architecture, which we just saw the JP6S tablet. I'm also involved with the data center infrastructure and also involved with our endpoint devices. Uh, Aventive supports over 3,000 jail facilities across the United States, anywhere from um, Department of Corrections within a state or local jail facilities. And if you can imagine, each one of those have different rules, different uh, requirements for how they want to manage their facility, what they allow and don't allow. So everything has to be customized based upon a particular site. Now, how do we manage the architecture as a team? So here I've shown what's typically done in many organizations that we also do at Aventive. So you have this architecture review board, and within the architecture review board is key stakeholders that would make decisions. So I have the chairperson. In this case, that's typically me. I lead the architecture review board for the entire organization. And then we have representatives from different areas. So the enterprise architecture team, there's a member of that that will represent how does a particular new proposal, a feature, a new product, how does that affect the data center? How does it affect the facilities? How does it affect security? Everything. So look at that. The business intelligence representative, that person is there uh, to talk about marketing, to talk about how what kind of business we have. They do data analytics to look at what is most popular, where is our demand for different services, etc. So if we go back to the tablet, I guess I didn't mention that, but on the tablet, it provides lots of different things. So uh, now you can download movies, you can play games, download music. It also provides a law library so that they can read up on their court cases and try to better. And then there's education. You can get a bachelor's degree just through that tablet. So it's like a window into the world. All of it is very tightly controlled. There are only certain apps are allowed in there. But the business intelligence person would look at, okay, what are our customers looking for in terms of new services? What are the inmates, our end users? What are they looking for? And on the other end, what are the friends and family that talk to our inmates? What are they interested in? How can we better improve their capability for communicating with their loved ones who are incarcerated? So business intelligence looks at that. Then the operations team, a representative from that, talks about, gives input on how do we manage the system going forward. If we add a new hardware, if we add new data servers, if we add a new switch or router, how does that affect everything? And provides input on that. And then we have the solutions architect. The solutions architect is the person that provides the architecture for the new feature that is being envisioned and provides support from the top down, all the way from initial conception of the feature to instructing the development team in who do the coding and the testing, all the way through QA, how that whole solution is going to roll out. So we call them solutions architecture team. And then the product engineering team, they responsible for managing and identifying what new hardware is required to support the development, um, what kind of new products are necessary. So maybe there needs a new kiosk, a new cell phone, a storage device, or a charging device. If you can think about it, everything that is required uh, for our core business is provided by Aventive. So it's called a greenfield environment. Come into the jail center, everything is ripped out, and all the new equipment is put in, from the servers, from the gateway, the firewalls, um, even electrical cable. Anything that is needed is completely turnkey. When you're done, it's turnkey. So all of those things have to be considered. And from a cybersecurity perspective, we have two types of cybersecurity organizations. We have the general cybersecurity organization, got a few dozen of those people, and we've been hiring like crazy over the past couple of years to beef up that team. The cybersecurity team is responsible for analyzing all threats, for running the virus scans, for identifying potential targets, for addressing future threats, and responsible for all of the equipment in terms of security, from the corporate side all the way to the jail facility side and the data centers. And they are basically responsible for ensuring the integrity and the safety of all the equipment and for the company. Then we have a cybersecurity architect. The cybersecurity architect is someone that's within my organization. So I have several people that are in my organization, and one of those persons is an architect, a cybersecurity architect. The cybersecurity architect is responsible for helping to design new devices and new equipment. So you can think the cybersecurity team is more responsible for general operations, general threat analysis, running scans, doing proactive things to protect our environment, where the cybersecurity architect is asking questions. Are we building the right system? Is it secure? Are we looking at any vulnerabilities for products that we're trying to introduce? How do we build a better product? Those kind of things. So that should give you an overview of what's happening there. Now I'll talk a little bit about the threats. So I'm sure a lot of you already know about this, but ransomware attacks have cost over $11 billion. And the total for online crime is expected to reach $6 trillion in 2020. Not billion, but trillion. Okay. And I've got some references down there, but many of these breaches, they go undetected for a long period of time. And there's always, unfortunately, there's a lag between the time a breach occurs and somebody is cognizant of that breach. And the time in between, a lot of damage could be done. So the threat continues to grow, unfortunately. The need for services from you who are getting your degrees in cybersecurity and other technical fields is ever growing, ever demanding. And maybe a lot of you have already heard, I'm not sure, heard about the NotPetya ransomware attack. That one ransomware caused $10 billion in damages. This really changed the game for the threat actors. This occurred when this attack occurred. Didn't know, it blindsided everyone. So it started in Ukraine, and it started taking down systems all across Ukraine. One of the interesting attacks was at the Maersk ship building, or the ship cargo ship company that had cargo ships all across the globe, and the system attacked, and I forgot which Scandinavian country it was in, Sweden or Norway. But when that attack occurred, every system was immediately infected, and all the systems started shutting down. And they immediately took action to unplug every system they could think of. And by the time they did that, the malware had basically infected and made every system unusable. So then they said, okay, what are we going to do now? It's complete destruction of the infrastructure. Turns out there was one place in Ghana that had a power outage at the same time this malware attack occurred. And so they were not infected just by pure luck. One small obscure facility in Ghana, and it had a lot of the data and information that was required to rebuild the network. It's kind of an interesting story. You might want to read up on it. But uh, at the time, the people who were running the data center weren't able to even get out of the country, didn't have passports, and it was a logistic nightmare. So they found a way to they found that the network pipe between Ghana and Sweden was too small. They couldn't get the data out fast enough, and it would have taken weeks, if not months, to transfer all that data. So they had to go and get the actual hard drives, and then they kind of used a baton by passing it from one country to another, wherever they could pass without having the passport, and eventually got back to the corporate headquarters where they started slowly rebuilding every system. So they eventually succeeded. It took about 3 weeks, but they just by sheer luck, because of that power outage, they were able to recover more successfully than other companies. And of course, it turned out it was a Russian GRU security agency that launched that attack, basically against Ukraine. And it just kind of ended up infecting a lot more businesses than that. So you can imagine now, every year we're more connected than we were before. So everything is connected to the internet. So it becomes even more critical to try to compartmentalize your data and your systems and try to protect that, so that one virus or malware does not destroy all of the servers within the company. So they asked, there was a survey that was done to talk about what are your biggest challenges, the most challenging things that you face. And the top three were zero trust data. That's number one. And we'll talk a little bit about zero trust data. Threat visibility and analytics, number two. And security automation and orchestration was number three. Each of those are extremely important. We'll talk a little bit about that. Now, back in the olden days, back when I was a little younger, security wasn't even a thing, right? So the internet started with the DARPANET, was just a communication network between a few universities, and kind of grew from there. But at the very beginning, nobody had a clue that there was any kind of security issues associated with that, or that anybody would take advantage of that. But of course, things have changed amazingly. So now we have nonstop media coverage about all these different incidents and threats, and it becomes a little bit tricky there, because a lot of companies, they do not want to admit that they had a problem. They do not, because that gives them bad publicity, saying, okay, this company screwed up, so should we do business with this company? They don't have a secure network. They don't have secure systems. And there's also, of course, cases where you have ransomware attacks, and the companies, some of them, most of them, thankfully, don't. But some companies will pay that ransom to get their systems back online. So it's a little bit spotty trying to gather data on all these different companies. But obviously, it's a mushrooming problem. Now, what also is adding to that is that we're becoming more and more connected. How do you know how to protect your system if you don't even know what your system is? This is a real problem. If you look into some companies with their data centers, they've been adding stuff to their data center over a decade, let's say. And they have different applications running around, and the guy who was managing this, or the gal who was managing that, they quit, moved on to another company, or what have you. And over the years, then you end up, oh, I don't know exactly where those applications are, or what would happen if I unplugged this server, or what have you. But in order to do an effective job in cybersecurity, you need to know what your systems are. You have to maintain a list of that. But how difficult is it to create that list? It's incredibly difficult because uh, you don't know exactly, you may not know exactly everything you have. So, what does that mean? Well, that means automation is very, very critical to get the job done, to know all the systems you have and what their vulnerabilities might be, and look at the traffic between those systems. All right. So I want to talk just a little bit about the data center, since data center operations are a big part of what we do at Aventive. Uh, the cyber threats, they exist within and without the perimeter. And the perimeter, when you talk about perimeter, you're talking about the imaginary line that separates what the company owns, quote unquote, and what everything else, which is the big cloud called internet. Uh, in the past, we've kind of focused on the north-south traffic, and I'll talk a little bit about what we mean by that. But in basically what the old style thinking was, in old style, we're only talking a couple of years back, but the idea was you set up a perimeter or a virtual fence around your data center and try to look outward and protect anything that's coming inside, to filter it, to check its characteristics and decide whether or not that should be allowed in. So you have the protection systems, you have the firewalls, you have filtering lists, and then you have multi-tier architecture. All of these things are designed to protect around the data center, putting up a fortress, if you say, around it. And that turns out to not be a good way to do it. It turns out it's important, but there is bigger threats even within the data center. And this was kind of like, once you made it through the firewall, then you can trust that data. So trust by default is one of the approaches, which has been exploited endlessly by hackers. So if we look at a typical network, and you can see that, okay, you have the headquarters on the right, and the headquarters has the firewall. It has maybe it has an Active Directory server, and it has a bunch of other client devices, laptops, tablets, etc., connected. And then you have storage nodes and you have servers. So all that's within the headquarters, let's say. And before you have a firewall, and you also have a DMZ. So with the DMZ, you want to make sure that it is a kind of a no man's land where you can monitor the traffic in a safe manner without having it to if there's any problem, it doesn't attack or expose any sensitive data that may be behind the DMZ. So then you all go out through all that data goes through the internet, and you might have branch offices with firewalls, and you have other data centers. And if you can imagine from an Aventive point of view, that whole concept gets extended out. And instead of calling all these the remote branch office, you could think of it as a remote jail facility, right? There's a small data closet, let's say, that each of those facilities would have, that would have all of the equipment that's necessary for the operation of the communications network. So if typically the classic way to design data centers is to have segmentation. So the external users on the left, they're trying to enter, get some kind of services for a company, access, let's say, or access in a catalog. They're trying to place orders. Lots of different reasons. Or it could be a remote worker who's connecting in through a VPN. So they'll first go in through the DMZ, and the DMZ provides the remote proxy to talk to the external application server, let's say, and then the application server in turn will access the sensitive information. So the enterprise database, let's say, that has data that needs to be accessed. And then in segment 3, So segment 3 would be the most secure. The segment 3 containing the sensitive data in the database and also having the internal users that are connected to the corporate LAN. And the external users, if they're, let's say, they're remote employees, they would connect through the VPN tunnel to get into the system. But if it's a non-customer entity or just a general user, then they would have to connect directly through the internet, and a different set of protocols would be used to ensure the safe transit of the data. So today we have to assume that everything is hostile, the whole network, whether it's your internal network or the external network or the internet. Everything is hostile. All external threats and internal threats, they exist on the network at all times. It's kind of like trust no one. You do not assume that anyone who has access, has sysadmin credentials, or is a employee who has access to it, you want to by default deny access to everything and only allow access that's important to do their job. So you cannot base your decision on what the locality where the person might reside. It doesn't matter. Everything is suspect. Every user, every network, every device that's put on the network, including IoT devices, everything can be suspect. There's a way to hack into everything. I don't know if you remember, there's been several cases reported where the Amazon Ring system been more sophisticated. Now they got cameras. You get cameras in your house and so forth. That's been hacked and very intrusive, where they've been able to hack the whole system and be able to control and monitor things within the house. So everything can be impacted. So how do we work those issues? One way is zero trust. Organizations across the world basically have now switched over to the zero trust approach, which means never trust, always verify. And there was a survey conducted about different companies. What is their approach? First of all, do they even know what zero trust model is? Okay, so there's a significant percentage that did not know. And do you have any plans to implement in the next year? Okay, yeah, we're going to start looking at it. Do you plan to implement within the next year? After that, yeah. And then 40% are starting to implement. And this is a survey that was just done in 2019. And then finally, only 12% of the organizations have fully implemented the zero trust model. So that's quite concerning. More than 80% of all the data breaches, they involve stolen or weak credentials. So what does that mean? That means that in these cases, your username or password is practically irrelevant, because this is where the hacker is able to grab that information, the username and password, of course, through phishing and other means. The hacking of the Democratic National Convention back in 2016, that was a classic case of a phishing attack. And as soon as they were able to read the usernames and passwords, the whole network was exposed because it was not segmented properly, and lots of attacks happened, and all that information got out. So but the bad actors are not going to use the front door. They can, but it's many cases it's so much easier just to trick somebody into giving you the keys to the castle, and then be able to run rampant within the network and get in what they need. Now, as a side note, I know there's some increasingly high-speed chips that have been developed from NVIDIA with a GPU, general processor, that can run through millions of passwords in just a short period of time. They go through a password dictionary and they can hack everything so quickly, and be able to break into a system. And they just kind of generally attack different systems. So that's why it's so important. You see that the notice you get, okay, you get a weak password, okay password, strong password, and more devices, particularly like iPhone, I know for sure that they every time you try to create a password for a new site, they give you a suggested very strong password, which you would never be able to memorize, but it'll memorize it for you. And then, of course, multi-factor authentication. That is becoming more of a trend within companies as well. So we have it at Ventive. Recently introduced, you log into anything, then you have to have a two-factor authentication with a cell phone or some other device outside of your general corporate laptop. So, all right. So talk about east, west, and north, south. Which is which? We have two types of traffic that are of big concern in the data center. You have the north-south traffic, which is the general perimeter protection we've been talking about, where a client goes through the network and then comes into the border of the network, may be filtered, may go through the firewall. Eventually, it filters the request goes through the leaf switches, and finally, it'll go to the servers, the web servers, the database servers, the mail servers, all of that, depending upon the request to get that information. So that's called north-south traffic. And then on the other hand, we have east-west traffic, which is the traffic between servers, between applications, between databases, all within the same data tier. We've always focused on north-south traffic, but the problem now resides in the east-west traffic. How do we deal with that issue? What are the targets? Everything that is connected is a target. Networks, workstations, IoT devices, bring your own devices, everything that can have a connection is a huge problem. And that's a bigger problem with the east-west traffic. So how do we contain that unauthorized data across the organization? We need to analyze the data path. This is one of the key tools. Like I said, networks are complex beasts. They grow exponentially. Every time you want to add a new application or new product, new service, then you've got to expand your data center, and you have additional workloads. And then you may, as part of your architecture, okay, application A needs to talk to application B, needs to get information from database C, and look at it just from a holistic point of view of what information needs to be shared. How do we share that information? And so if you look at the red lines here, this is the unexpected traffic where you're going between servers or going between clients, information. And you look at that information, you look at run this sophisticated security software to determine, are these expected patterns or are they not expected? What should we do to compartmentalize this? And as part of the zero trust model, you can think of it of a couple of ways. Number one, it's a real pain because what you're trying to do is restrict communication. But what do we want to do? We want to enhance communication to get the services that we need. But we look at what are some of the paths that should never be crossed. Would you expect this server in this location to talk to this server at another location? And if the answer is no, then you need to prevent that communication through using access control lists or filtering or some other techniques. And that has to be looked at. Each one of those, the whole network map needs to be looked at by the cybersecurity experts to ascertain where those problems might reside and ask questions. So that's why we kind of like have this parallel organization, right? So we have the the design architects who are responsible for creating the newest gadgets, newest, bestest, greatest gadgets, but alongside them have to work the cybersecurity architects, and in some cases, cybersecurity engineer, depending on how the organization is laid out, so that they can ensure that what we're building is safe and is suitable going forward. And like I was kind of talking about earlier, there's other engineering experts that are involved too. So it's not just a design architect and a cybersecurity architect. You have the reliability engineer, you have the business analyst, you have all the different experts that need to get together to ensure that what you're putting out is safe, reliable, effective, and provides the end user consumer with what they're looking for. All that has to be transparent. So from a consumer point of view, it works like magic. They get everything they need. Okay, so if we look at enterprise cybersecurity, I've kind of looked at it into three parts. We have discover part. We need to use automation as much as possible so that we can see what our endpoints are, what our application flows are, identify what are our high value systems and the critical applications, right? The more important the information that you have, the more critical it is to protect it. For example, if you're a retailing firm and you're storing customer credit card information, um, address information, phone numbers, and that thing, that's called personally identifiable information, or PII. And that has to be super secure. Other information that may just be the catalog information that shows what you can buy, that's not nearly as critical. Obviously, you want to protect it so it doesn't get destroyed, but you have to look at different zones of security dependent upon the criticality and the sensitivity of the data you're trying to protect. Then the next part is to use micro-segmentation so that you look at every single node, every application, and then reduce the risk in terms of what can communicate across. And then you have to enforce this. So once you complete the analysis, you have to project policies to enforce all of the company to follow these particular guidelines. And the audits, you have audits and all that to make sure everything occurs. And then going back to automation, we've got to increase the amount of automation we use. No human could do this, where we continually to monitor our environment and adjust our environment based upon that. So I'm going to jump just to a couple of more items I want to look at. Protection tips. Ensure that all your equipment has the latest software patch. So the other attack I was mentioning before, not Panya, that could not have occurred if the latest patch was installed. So if you are not using the latest security patches and the latest OS patches, then you already open yourself a vulnerability, because it's already known and be well known by the attacker community once it's been exposed. You also need to check that you address misconfigured and unsecured protocols, minimize the attack surface through network segmentation, and more importantly, micro-segmentation. Need to protect all the untrusted networks in every device that can connect to your system. Right? It's becoming more and more popular for BYOD devices, and they have to be treated just as securely as you treat corporate assets with laptops, corporate laptops and cell phones, etc. Training, of course, is very important. And really, you need to restrict access through different encryption techniques. So data is really the important part, right? So we need to classify, protect, and encrypt our data. Networks are extremely complex and the paths can be risky. So basically, you need to protect data wherever it is. There's several different ways to, if we use encryption, how we can use encryption. We can encrypt the disk drive itself, which will protect the data on there. If somebody manages to break into the data center and steal those disk drives, they can't use them. Then there's encryption at rest. So that means that the data is encrypted when it's stored. So when it's accessed, you can't read that data. And then finally, there's encryption in transit, where the data is encrypted through IPsec, is a very popular encryption protocol, IPsec over VPN. So even if that data is accessed, no one's going to be able to read it. So best practices for zero trust data: make sure you encrypt everything and everywhere, no, regardless of whether it's being used or transformed. Um, but there's an interesting thing. Even if you encrypt everything, I don't know if everyone's heard of this other kind of ransomware attack, right? So even if you encrypt everything, the malware can come in. It can take over your storage, and then it can, even though it can't read it, it can re-encrypt it. Once it's re-encrypted, then you can't access it. So the data is completely useless. No one can read it, and so absolutely nobody can read it at that point. So there's a technique called worm. I don't know if anybody's heard of that. So it means write once, read many. What that means is once you store that data, one of the big popular data storage technologies is S3 objects. If you've heard of S3 from Amazon AWS and within the data centers, as soon as you write that object to its storage location, it's immutable, meaning you cannot change that data. So even if a bad actor got in there, first they couldn't read it, but even if they tried to re-encrypt it to hold it ransom, they couldn't do it because it can only be written one time and cannot be accessed. Um, I only got a few minutes, so let me just jump right over this other important thing: checklists. Checklists are a really important technique. They're becoming more popular. But the checklists are used across the companies where you say, okay, what kind of technologies that we currently have and what are the values that they're provided? Are we using internal data points? If so, how are they being used? Can the security team focus on all the internal traffic and movement? Do they have the right tools to get the job done? Roadmaps. What do we have next in the organization? What changes are we going to make? Any changes you make is going to affect your security profile. You need a heads up on everything that's coming on board. Has your security team, have they been informed about any upcoming business developments? Make sure that they're included at the top level discussions. And do we have any projects in the works now that we might need to include members of the cybersecurity team? So checklists apply for a lot of different things, but it's very important in the cybersecurity field where you need to go through that written down list and make sure that you're meeting every bit of the requirements to ensure that you have the best system um, that can be delivered either internally, that you're developing something internally, or on a product that's external. Okay, so wrapping it up, thank you very much. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. Feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me by email or LinkedIn. So with that, I'll turn it back over.
Hi, thank you so much. That was really informational, and I feel like I learned a lot. Let's see, are there any questions? We can take some questions. We have a few minutes. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to just unmute your mic and ask it, or drop it in the chat.
Yeah, I know I went a little bit fast over a lot of this material, but I'd be really happy. I'd be tickled pink if you want to reach out to me and have questions later on. Feel free to just contact me.
All right. Well, if there are no questions right now, then we can end the event over here. Thank you again, Mr. Taylor, for coming in and taking the time to talk to us. We really had a great time just listening in and seeing how it works at an enterprise level. So thank you again.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. I hope I left a few tidbits for you. And congratulations to all of you in pursuing your degree program, working in the cybersecurity field or computer science, wherever you may end up. We're looking forward to having everybody to pass the baton to the next generation to ensure our better and brighter future in security. So thank you.